Talk about a strange season that couldn't really tell when it began or ended. Some shows started late, while others were half over before the rest even got off the ground. It makes doing seasonal videos a pain when more than one show ended before the halfway point, and I'm supposed to remember it well enough to say if it was good or not. Then again, maybe that's the answer. So with that, let's put fall 2021 to bed. The good shows this season were honestly surprising, mostly because they tended to look pretty average on the surface, but stood out amongst similar ones in their respective genres to be special. These are the shows I recommend people to check out. I don't think it's any surprise that Ousama ranking is a standout this season. A series brimming with personality through a unique style, mixed with a story that's familiar but still fresh. This borrowed heavily from the shonen battle genre, but by combining it with a fairy tale presentation, it makes this a series dripping with thematic purpose that keeps audiences captivated. Boji being deaf and weak is a point he has to overcome on his journey as the obvious protagonist, and I want to see him succeed. But who the villains are and what their goals might be is a constant flux that gives this series a bite, so you're truly invested in what happens. I praised the art style enough in my preview, but it's worth restating how nice this looks. Using somewhat basic designs and color choice works to this series' benefit from a thematic standpoint, as well as an artistic one, as it really blows me away with the fast pace and inventive camera work. And that's not even mentioning the action itself, that's impressively kinetic. I like this one a ton, and it had me glued to my seat each week, so I'm looking forward to seeing what the second core brings. Horror really took center stage with Mieruko-chan this season. A slice-of-life horror series that actually manages to be both tense and chilling is a feat these days, as audiences grow increasingly numb to the genre. But this one managed to keep things fresh by slowly building suspense with a vague threat in the entities Miko sees, but also mixing in the unknown, with vast chunks of this series not making it concrete if these things can actually hurt her or not. Plus, the fact that some of these entities are good leaves some of the episodes with an uplifting message, so we're not just experiencing one thing, fear, as it tries to pound "be scared" into our heads over and over. I think what impressed me the most was this show's willingness to tell an engaging story each week, or even each segment, without relying on the gimmick of, this girl can see ghosts, so it had heart. The art style and animation was fairly robust as well, with disturbing designs and unnatural looks for the monsters that felt both alien and a product of the world. If you're easily shaken and don't mind being a little unnerved, this is a great watch, so I recommend it. Putting Kimetsu no Yaiba here might be a bit misleading, as while I enjoyed it, I think the first season's better. That's not to say the animation or quality dropped, but having read the manga, the Mugen train arc felt bloated when converted to a television format. I will say though, the next arc will most likely fly by in comparison, but that's still underway. Ufotable did a great job as they always do, and while enjoyable, it certainly lacked some of the punch we've seen from this series already. And now for my hot take, the OP from both of the new arcs don't hold a candle to season 1's. Mushoku Tensei was another season 2, or second core, that line's getting blurred more and more these days, that made its way into this section, and for good reason. Season 1 showed personal growth on the main character's part as he understands his flaws and wants to change, but this season showed he's still haunted by his past, how he struggles to never be like his old self, despite how hard that can be when he's faced with serious pain. The first season of this was really good, but I think this one's what cemented it as a great anime for viewers. As last time we got to know Rudy and his family, but this season opened up the world, lore, and primary conflicts to show us why we should care, and it's flawlessly executed. You know, it's fucking crazy how good Isekai used to be back when it had to try and didn't have shoulders to stand on like the more recent ones do. Which is why this resonates with audiences, because it's been building that investment and payoff. All I can say is, I'm looking forward to more when it eventually comes out. A series that walked a tightrope was Shin no Nakama, because it could have easily been another like Last Dungeon Boonies. With the protagonist being so OP, it was pretty much the only joke the series had. Or, how too much fan service could have basically melted away any tension this series had built, but it struck a happy medium, where the conflicts in this series are ones not solved by raw power, but through teamwork and ingenuity. Yeah, our characters are stupidly strong, but when they're trying to run a new drugstore, keep a sauna in business, and solve a string of freak accidents, who can punch the hardest doesn't really matter. The core group is incredibly likable, with a darker look at the destined hero trope, the actual politics of running a world-saving party, but most importantly, the actually awesome and believable romance between Red and Rit. Like, these two work so well together in supporting each other, but also it's nice to see a romance develop organically without the whole series needing to revolve around it. The animation for this wasn't very stylized, but as I often say, that's a bonus, not the point. It's well animated and nicely composed, that I got lost in the experience. Overall, this is just a top-notch fantasy series. Historical throwbacks are fun, especially when it's not some shonen hyper-stylized action series. Heike Monogatari brought the crazy wars of feudal Japan back to our screens, without feeling the need to introduce magic powers or crazy strong sword battles. Well, ignore the Future Sight and Sixth Sense reference. Alright, I think this one is great because it really captures the humanity in this story well. It's not about cartoonish villains out to ruin everything for everyone else, but a family of well-off people getting drunk on their power. They have good and bad actors on both sides, and that propels the plot forward with a nice ebb and flow portraying the downfall of the prolific Heike clan. And while, yes, it does deal with combat, the main focus here is the politics, as these confrontations are decided before the battles even begin, meaning the impressively large cast of characters all have significant roles to play, and that makes their tragedies hit home more. The fact that there's no real villains in this story, just people making mistakes that spiral out of control motivated by their own self-interests, is impressive. The animation for this is, of course, also impressive. Science Suru did a fantastic job utilizing camera work, color, and motion to tell this visually more than anything. So yeah, highly recommended. God, I hate trying to praise comedies, and Komi-san Comyushou is no different. I've basically said all this in my preview, that the humor works because it's incredibly well timed and varied, using pretty much every style of joke that you can think of to feel fresh. So let's leave it at that, and talk about why this works as a story too, because this has an emotional heart that's worth watching. Komi is a girl who has severe anxiety and doesn't talk to others, essentially shutting down. So seeing her slowly come out of her shell and not at the prodding of others because she actually wants to, gives this immense satisfaction in her small strides. These are personal goals she's setting out to accomplish and does so through her own actions, even if her growing group of friends try to help her. Seeing this close bond form and expand, while a romance between the two leads buds as well, makes this more than your typical high school romance comedy, by making the growth the characters experience feel real and earned, as well as treating it sincerely. Animation was top-notch, matching the mood between goofy comedy, bombastic action, and subtle cinematography to sell the more heartfelt scenes, that I have to say this really has something for everyone, an absolute must-watch. Now we're getting into the middle of the road. These are shows that are ultimately passable or even enjoyable, but had a few things holding them back from being easily recommendable, so these all come with a condition. You may be shocked that Takt Op Destiny ended up this low, as I enjoyed the series, but I'm not entirely blind to its flaws. For one, the plot is both standard and a mess, with a fairly average sightseeing tour of a post-apocalyptic USA, and the supposedly good military force being actually evil was a twist everyone saw because they don't live under a rock. However, the pacing was the major drawback, with the middle of this series feeling like it didn't need to exist as it didn't accomplish much. Destiny being recognized for who she is rather than who Cosette was is a highlight, but Takt's sudden surge of power and why he seems to be the focal point of the climax are really unexplored. Well, besides his dad was a famous conductor, okay. The climax and heel turn just sort of come, with Takt and Destiny being implied to be important to it, but it kicks off without them. They stop it pretty readily. So I guess they weren't. I feel they could have had more involvement besides stopping it, like why them specifically is my issue, and because they're main characters is really poor justification. Having two animation studios helm this project meant there was a massive gap in quality between episodes, and while Mappa can do amazing work, they clearly didn't bring their A-game while Madhouse did. Some episodes were full of energy, had amazing fight choreography, while an episode or two later, the series felt like it had taken a sedative. You can really tell who did which episode too, because the Mappa episodes have similar styles that look like other Mappa shows. And hey, those are the ones that sucked. I'm just disappointed because this could have been better. But hey, it's still enjoyable. And what could have been a trash heap? KAGINADO showed us that the feels bait of Key's library can actually make for a decent comedy if not taken too seriously. I think I would have enjoyed this more if it was like the fun, relatable parts of most Key stories. You know, before the train wreck of over-the-top tragedy comes barreling down. But that's not what we got, since it's filled with inside jokes that strip away any ounce of moe these characters had. This is probably impenetrable to non-fans. If you haven't seen Clannad, Canon, Little Busters, and just about every other major Key franchise, the jokes here will go over your head, or at least not land as well as they should. And even if you have seen everything, you honestly should have a working knowledge of the visual novels these were based on too, as there's even references to Tomoyo After for Clannad. This is so hyper niche that it's unrecommendable, unless you're a hardcore Key fan, so keep that in mind. I really wanted to like Senpai ga Uzai Kouhai no Hanashi more than I did, and it's an entirely serviceable comedy show with a cute, likable cast. I enjoyed the relationships built in this series. The supporting cast adds some great humor, but the cute designs and couples don't really push this up to top tier. The writing here was pretty average, and coming off the heels of other anime that had better, more unique romances, this one felt by the numbers, therefore didn't really capture my interest. Sorry, the pushy, embarrassed, and slightly soon protagonist wanting her muscle daddy dense senpai's love is something we've seen before, and taking it out of the high school setting and putting it in an office wasn't as revolutionary as the author probably hoped. This'll be something people forget about, unless it gets a season 2. And only then can we hope to see some actual romance progression between the two leads. Watch if you want an office rom-com, I guess. Platinum End had potential, and while it's unique, I also wasn't really drawn into the story. The whole god candidate and fighting with otherworldly powers could have worked with a more interesting cast. Coming from Death Note, the author's previous work, the protagonist here is awfully bland. He really has no reason to partake in the plot besides the nebulous desire for happiness, and his morals are weirdly hard to pin down despite him being so adamant about them. Like, he doesn't want to kill, but he also doesn't want to infringe on others' happiness. What the hell is this shit? I just couldn't really get invested in him or the other characters. Here's the thing, Light and L are two very interesting characters because they turn tropes on their head, and despite them playing 4D chess the whole time, their goals were very clear. These guys are playing checkers, there's not really an end goal for their arcs. Maybe the second core will change my mind, but I'm not really expecting much. In another case of close but no cigar, Sekai Saikyo no Ansatsusha I also wanted to like, but it barely ended up in this part of the list because it became too standard of an isekai. So, a hard-ass assassin goes to a fantasy world under contract by a goddess to kill the hero after he defeats the demon lord because he's destined to destroy the world himself. Cool. We spend time with him before his death and after he's reincarnated, then we spend some time learning the magic system and getting to know the rest of the cast. And then halfway through, it turns into the typical harem fest bullshit, where the stern badass assassin we knew becomes a lovesick teenage boy with serious main characteritis. I was down for the experimentation with magic, the assassination missions, and hell, even the girls, but when he starts accumulating a harem and thinking with his dick, I wanted to drop this series. I'm just so disappointed because this was doing so well, and then decided to be a run-of-the-mill isekai, which felt like a betrayal because I was already invested. But for the genre, it's passable if not formulaic. Gyuketsuki Tsugushi knew I struggled putting here for the opposite reason. I like this show a lot because it holds nothing sacred. Its casts are all unique, energetic, and bring this strange world to life, mixing classic vampire tropes with a modern society, where vampires are not just accepted, but almost a nuisance due to their weird powers and often obscene personalities. We get a lot of jokes at everyone's expense, as the series doesn't ground itself in pop culture or even slapstick, but more building off-the-wall situations that escalate to get the audience to laugh. So why is it down here? Because despite the infectious energy the actors brought, the humor doesn't have me in stitches, as well as the lack of ambition other comedies had this season. This is fun, just not an instant classic, or even something I'll remember after a season or two. Check it out for a few laughs though. Tsukito Laikato no Sferatu was interesting to say the least. A series that had a unique story to tell with an alternate take on history that packed a nice message. So why is it down here? I mean, I'm usually a sucker for overcoming adversity, and the strong anti-racism theme buried in this, with the vampire's treatment being reminiscent of the Tuskegee experiment, is the sort of artistic garbage I gargle. But, doesn't do a great job at handling that message. It's saying something pretty damn important, but it's undercut by the presentation, weirdly needless alternate history that's way too similar to our own to justify itself, and an incredibly slow burn of a storyline that takes forever to manifest. Space. Great. Why does this series get there halfway through, and spend the next half basically redoing it? And that's not to say it was time well spent building the foundation for this, hey, racism is bad actually message, as the protagonist himself accepts this after an episode, and the rest of the cast isn't really on board with it until the end of the series. So that feels like it's expecting the message to do the legwork, rather than having the characters get there on their own. Plus, the presentation wasn't too great, aside from the oral fixation with the vampire girl that was borderline distracting considering how well animated it was. Nice, interesting, but sort of lazy in its execution. And that's what held it back. Taisho Otome Otogi Banashi was a decent show that was not just an interesting rom-com because of its setting, being a historical piece that takes place during Japan's modernization, but it was cute too. I liked the characters, the upward momentum of the story, and the animation had a style that resonated well. But the problem was, competition. There was a better historical, romance, and multiple comedies this season that made this one not stand out as well, but it's got an audience, those who like cute romances and period pieces, especially if you like both. So since we looked at the good and the passable, it's time we talk about what failed hard this season. And there's a lot, despite them not all failing for the usual reasons. Sankaku Mado no Sotogawa wa Yoru wasn't bad per se, but I just couldn't really get into this series. And that sucks because I really wanted to, with its homoerotic undertones, supernatural premise, and mystery elements. But ultimately it fell short. The cast wasn't super interesting to begin with, even flat out grating at times, and visually the series just felt bland. And that is until it tried to be interesting, where it devolved into visual mush, with generic trippy backgrounds. I think it was just too confused on what it wanted to be that it got bogged down in all the concepts. Did it want to be a horror show? Mystery, a slightly gay romance, a character drama, or did it want to be about a villain redemption arc? None of them really felt developed and just dropped on the audience after a few episodes, so I don't regret dropping it back, despite the promise this initially held. Pura-ore Pride of Orange felt like a sports anime using the idol show formula, slow to develop, and then it forgot to do the actual development. I was okay with the less popular sport, at least by anime standards, and taking a bunch of cute girl newbies to throw at it is a tired but at least tested formula, but ultimately this didn't entertain. The core cast shared all of one character trait between them. One of the girls prominent in the OP disappears after episode 3, only to pop back in towards the end of the show to justify her budget in the character design department by squeezing a few more minutes out of her. And there was just really no real reason for her inclusion in the first place. Just most of the hockey part of this show felt like an afterthought, even if it was well animated, when it's clear from the outset they really just wanted a cute girls anime. But the girls aren't even that cute and spend most of their time not doing much of anything. I would have actually loved to have seen them getting good at the sport, instead of glossing over that with a training camp and like 2 games total, so it's kind of a waste of time. I don't think it's much of a surprise I dropped Tesla Note. Yeah, it was an awful CG anime on par with X-Arm. Not much more to say about it. This was a mess with bad animation and a nightmare of a plot that screamed trying too hard from the outset. This was bad. And not even so bad it was funny, but just the edgy teenager who thinks they're writing a masterpiece sort of bad, which is just sad. Yakunada Mugcut Mo I couldn't bring myself to care about, and that's saying something for a show with a short runtime. Last time I looked at this show it was okay, but it didn't really have anything going for it. So this season it needed to step up its game to give me a reason to care, which it didn't. If you have a middling show and you want a season 2, make it more engaging. Then again, the live action segments are probably the real draw for the Japanese audience. Muteking, the dancing hero, was too repetitive to be interesting, as the episodes followed the same beat every single time for too long before introducing variety. I found myself bored after episode 3 of seeing not just the same transformation scene, but the same fight scene with the same song. Catchy at first? Yeah. After 4 times though, I'm sick of it, which means it was up to the animation and plot to salvage this. It couldn't do that because the animation was god-awful, looking like a budget Flash cartoon from the late 2000s. And the storyline was just evil Steve Jobs trying to take over the world. Anyway, repetitive sums this up, so skip it. And that's it. Fall 2021 came and went before we knew it, with a really strong showing, having shows that packed heart, thrilling adventures, and laughs that connected with audiences. But with it now at a close, our sights are firmly set on winter 2022. Hey, you've made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and do all the other YouTube stuff to help the channel grow. You can also join my Discord with a link down in the description, and if you want to support me and vote on what I'm watching next season, head on over to my Patreon to pick up some extra perks. Thanks for watching.